Welcome to the invisible world. Right now, as you sit watching this screen, the air around you is completely saturated with invisible energy. Wi-Fi signals, cellular data, satellite transmissions, all passing silently through your walls and through your body. We take this invisible ocean for granted. We assume that if we tune into a frequency, we will hear music or news or a familiar voice. But there is a dark, forgotten corner of the radio spectrum, a place where the rules of modern broadcasting do not apply, a place where machines have been talking to the void for over 50 years. Tonight, we are investigating the most enduring, unexplainable, and terrifying auditory mystery of the 20th century. The number stations. This is Chapter 1. The Ghost in the Static. In the deep winter of 1997, a 28-year-old electrical engineer named Thomas was living in a secluded cabin in the dense forests of northern Michigan. Thomas was not a typical hobbyist. He was a highly skilled amateur radio operator, a Dexter, someone who spends their nights scanning the shortwave radio bands, trying to pull faint, distant signals out of the atmospheric noise. He had thousands of dollars of military-grade antenna wire strung through the pine trees behind his cabin. His desk was covered in heavy, glowing, analog radio receivers. When the sun went down and the ionosphere cooled, Thomas could listen to the entire world. He could hear air traffic control in Tokyo, encrypted naval transmissions in the Atlantic, and the faint, ghostly echoes of distant weather stations. But on the night of November 12th, at exactly 2:15 in the morning, Thomas found something that was not meant to be heard. He was slowly turning the heavy metal dial of his primary receiver, moving through the 4,000 kilohertz range. It was mostly empty static, the rushing sound of cosmic radiation. Suddenly, the static completely dropped out. The signal was incredibly strong. It pinned the needle on his signal meter all the way to the right. It was a raw, unmodulated carrier wave, a wall of pure electronic silence. Thomas leaned closer to his speakers. He checked his antenna connections. Everything was perfect. He waited in the quiet cabin, listening to the hum of the silent transmission. 10 seconds passed, then 20, and then the silence was broken. It was not static. It was not a voice. It was a mechanical, buzzing tone. BZZZZZZ, E, Ni, ZZ, Z, Z, Ni, 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 BZZZ. It lasted for exactly 1.2 seconds, followed by a pause of 1.3 seconds. Over and over again, it sounded raw, primitive, like a massive industrial machine grinding away in an empty concrete room. Thomas recognized it immediately. in the deep corners of the amateur radio community, this signal was a legend. They called it the buzzer, officially known as UVB-76, a mysterious broadcast transmitting from deep within the Russian wilderness near the swamps of Poverovo. It had been buzzing non-stop since the late 1970s. Nobody knew who operated it. Nobody knew its purpose. But Thomas was not interested in the buzzing. He knew that the real terror of UVB-76 was what happened when the buzzing stopped. He hit record on his reel-to-reel audio tape deck. He sat in his heavy wooden chair, staring at the glowing orange dials of his radio. For 2 hours, the buzzing continued, relentless, hypnotic. At exactly 4:30 in the morning, the buzzing abruptly cut off. The sudden silence in the cabin was deafening. Thomas stopped breathing. His hands hovered over the volume dial. Then, through the heavy static, he heard the sound of a microphone being picked up. He heard the scrape of a chair moving across a hard floor. He heard a man clear his throat. And then a voice spoke. It was a harsh, deep Russian voice, distorted by the thousands of miles of atmosphere. Shenya. Ulyana. Ivan. Roman 25. 18. 490. The voice read a string of seemingly random names and numbers. There was no emotion, just a cold, calculated delivery of encrypted information. Thomas wrote down every single number on his yellow notepad. His heart was racing. He was listening to a live, active intelligence drop. A message meant for a spy hiding somewhere in the world, receiving their orders through the invisible waves of the shortwave radio. The voice repeated the sequence twice, and then the microphone clicked off. The mechanical buzzing immediately returned. BZZZZ.BZZZ. Thomas leaned back in his chair, wiping the sweat from his forehead. He had captured it, but as he looked down at the numbers he had written, he noticed something impossible. He was an engineer. He understood patterns. He pulled out a frequency chart and began to decode the basic numeric structure of the message. The numbers were not random. When converted into basic geographic coordinates, they did not point to a major city or a military base in Europe. The coordinates pointed to a location exactly 4 miles away from Thomas's cabin, deep in the frozen Michigan woods. When we return in Chapter 2, we will explore the terrifying history of the Cold War broadcasts and what happens when Thomas decides to track the source of the signal in the dark. Welcome back. During the height of the Cold War, the world was quietly divided by invisible lines of communication. Intelligence agencies across the globe faced a massive problem. How do you send orders to a spy operating deep inside enemy territory without exposing their location? The answer was a cryptographic masterpiece known as the one-time pad, broadcast over shortwave radio. Anyone could listen to the numbers. The enemy could record them, analyze them, and study them for decades. But without the matching physical key, the numbers were mathematically unbreakable. It was the perfect system, a ghost broadcasting in plain sight. This is Chapter 2, The Dead Drop. Thomas sat in his cabin, staring at the yellow notepad. The glowing orange numbers on his radio dial read 4,625 kilohertz. The mechanical buzzing of the Russian station continued its relentless rhythm through his speakers. BZZZZ dot BZZZ MZZZ. The geographic coordinates he had decoded were impossible. UVB 76 was supposed to be broadcasting from a swamp near Moscow. Yet, the mathematical translation of the voice message pointed to a specific plot of state-owned forest exactly 4 miles north of his property line. It was 3:30 in the morning. The temperature outside was 12 degrees below zero. Thomas was not a brave man, but the curiosity of an engineer is a dangerous thing. He turned off his reel-to-reel tape deck, but he left the primary radio receiver running. He walked over to his closet and pulled on his heavy, insulated winter boots, a thick parka, and a pair of leather gloves. From his workbench, he grabbed a portable, battery-powered shortwave radio receiver and the directional loop antenna. This device was designed to play a game known as fox hunting among amateur radio operators. By sweeping the antenna in an arc, he could pinpoint the exact physical direction a radio signal was coming from. He stepped out onto the wooden porch of his cabin. The freezing air hit his lungs like shattered glass. The Michigan woods were buried under 2 feet of fresh snow. The silence of the forest was absolute. He turned on his portable radio and tuned it to 4,625 kilohertz. The buzzing instantly filled the cold air around him. BZZZZ dot BZZZZ. He plugged a single earpiece into the radio, leaving his other ear open to the quiet sounds of the winter woods. He strapped on a headlamp, casting a bright beam of white light through the towering pine trees, and began to make his way through the deep snow. The hike was an effort. For the first 2 miles, the signal in his ear remained steady. He swept the directional antenna left and right, following the strongest point of the buzzing. It was pulling him deeper into a section of the forest he had never explored, an area marked on local maps as an old, forgotten industrial tract from the 1920s. By 4:45 in the morning, as he crested a small, snow-covered ridge, the signal in his earpiece suddenly changed. The buzzing did not get louder, it got clearer. When you listen to a distant shortwave broadcast, the audio is constantly shifting, fading in and out. But the buzzing Thomas was hearing now was incredibly sharp. It was local. He was not listening to a distant broadcast. He was listening to a local repeater. Something in these woods was receiving a signal and rebroadcasting it. Thomas swept his headlamp across the dark valley below the ridge. The beam cut through the falling snow and hit something metallic. It was a large, rusted, steel chain-link fence, completely out of place in the middle of the forest. Thomas slowly walked down the ridge toward the fence. His heart was beating fast with anticipation. The buzzing in his earpiece was overwhelming now. As he reached the perimeter, he saw an old metal sign bolted to the rusted chain links. The paint was peeling, but the words were still visible. Property of the Northern Communications Company. Historic site. The heavy lock on the main gate had long since weathered away. It hung loosely on the metal chain. Thomas pushed the gate open. It creaked on its rusted hinges, echoing through the silent, frozen trees. Inside the compound, partially buried under decades of snow and fallen pine branches, was a low, flat, concrete building. A thick bundle of black cables ran from the roof of the structure up into the canopy of a massive pine tree, acting as a hidden antenna. Thomas stood in front of the heavy steel door of the building. The buzzing in his earpiece was vibrating in his ear. He reached out with a gloved hand and turned the cold metal handle of the door. It was unlocked. He pulled the door open, revealing a staircase leading down to the lower level. The smell of old dust and electrical grease wafted out from below. And then the buzzing in his earpiece abruptly stopped. Thomas paused. The sudden silence was unexpected. He waited for the automated signal to come through the radio again. But the voice did not come from the radio in his hand. From deep within the concrete basement below his feet, a heavy automated voice echoed up the stairs. Station Alpha. Station Beta. Active. When we return in Chapter 3, we will explore the discovery waiting below. And what happens when the broadcast speaks directly to you. Welcome to our third and final chapter. There is a comforting idea we tell ourselves about technology. We believe that when we unplug a machine, it stops. But in the forgotten corners of the past, machines were built to last. They were built to run on backup power, drawing energy from old reserves, listening to the static until someone found them. This is Chapter 3, The Forgotten Station. Thomas stood at the top of the concrete staircase. The freezing winter wind blew through the open steel door behind him. But the air rising from the room below was surprisingly warm. It smelled heavily of undisturbed dust. The heavy, automated voice echoed up the stairwell one last time. 20-5.18, 490, and then absolute silence. The mechanical buzzing did not return. Thomas drew a long breath. The beam of his headlamp cut through the darkness as he slowly descended the concrete steps. His heavy winter boots made dull thuds against the stairs. 10 steps, 20 steps, 30 steps down. He reached the bottom. The beam of his light swept across a massive, underground room. It was a technological time capsule. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling racks of 1970s radio equipment. Thick bundles of black cables snaked across the damp concrete floor like dead serpents. Everything was coated in a thick, gray layer of dust that had not been disturbed in decades. But the room was not dead. In the center of the far wall, a massive wall of vacuum tubes was glowing with a fierce, hellish orange light. The heat radiating from the ancient hardware was intense. The transmitter was fully powered on, humming with massive electrical current. Thomas slowly approached the main control console. He was an engineer. He knew exactly what he was looking at. This was a high-powered, automated relay station. It was designed to catch the faint shortwave signals from Russia and rebroadcast them across the American Midwest with terrifying, localized power. But something was deeply, impossibly wrong. He traced the thick audio input cable from the glowing transmitter down to its source. The cable was connected to a massive reel-to-reel magnetic tape machine sitting on a rusted metal desk. Thomas wiped the thick dust off the face of the machine. The metal spools of brown magnetic tape were completely frozen. The rubber drive belts had rotted away decades ago. The machine was physically destroyed. It had not moved a single inch in 40 years. There was no live audio feed. There was no tape playing. Where was the voice coming from? Thomas stared at the dead tape machine, his heart pounding violently against his ribs. The orange glow of the vacuum tubes cast long, distorted shadows across the concrete walls. Suddenly, the heavy electrical hum of the massive transmitter shifted in pitch. It dropped an entire octave, vibrating through the concrete floor and up into Thomas's boots. The silence in the bunker was broken, but it was not the mechanical buzzing, and it was not the harsh Russian voice. The massive, rusted steel speaker mounted above the console crackled to life. The voice that came through the speaker was not speaking Russian. It was speaking perfect, unaccented English. It was a flat, synthesized, dead voice. Thomas. 28. Thomas froze completely. The air vanished from his lungs. The voice continued. It did not sound like it was bouncing off the ionosphere. It sounded like it was in the room with him. Latitude 46.5. Longitude 87.2. It was reciting his exact physical coordinates. Intruder, intruder, intruder. Before Thomas could even process the sheer terror of what the machine was saying, a deafening, metallic crash echoed down the stairwell. The heavy steel door at the top of the stairs had slammed completely shut, cutting off the howling wind. Total panic erupted in Thomas's brain. He abandoned his portable radio. He spun around and sprinted for the stairs in the dark, guided only by the frantic beam of his headlamp. He took the concrete steps, 3 at a time, his boots slipping on the slick, dusty stone. He slammed his entire body weight against the heavy steel door. It did not budge. He screamed, dropping his flashlight, and dug his gloved hands into the rusted latch, pulling with every ounce of terrifying, primitive adrenaline he possessed. With a sickening screech of ancient metal, the latch gave way. Thomas burst out into the freezing night air, collapsing into the deep, fresh snow. He did not look back. He ran the 4 miles back to his cabin through the pitch-black forest, leaving all of his equipment behind. Thomas never turned on a shortwave radio ever again. He sold his cabin and moved to a crowded city, surrounding himself with the noise of millions of people. But he knows the truth. The air around us is not empty. The numbers are still being broadcast 24 hours a day, bouncing through the atmosphere. We do not know who is sending them. We do not know who they are meant for. But the most terrifying truth of the invisible world is this: when you tune your radio into the dark, you are not just listening to the void. Sometimes the void is listening back. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the terrifying mystery of the number stations. If you have ever heard something unexplainable on a radio frequency, share your story in the comments below. If you survive this true documentary, please subscribe to Deep Story. Turn on the notification bell and leave a like to support our investigations into the unknown. Keep your signals clear, stay out of the static, and I will see you in the next nightmare.